Police department, police department.
Hello, help!
Yes.
Please!
It was an ordinary evening in the Allen household, or at least that's how it appeared from the outside. But inside those walls, events were about to unfold that would send shockwaves through the community for years to come. At exactly 9:41 p.m., the emergency dispatch center received a call that began like so many others, frantic, disjointed, and desperate.
Okay, what's going on there?
She's in the basement. Pulled her up. I tried to give her CPR. I pulled her up.
On the line was Jimmy Allen. His words came fast, his breathing heavy as he told the dispatcher that his wife, Amy, had tried to hang herself in the basement. "Please, you need to send someone right now." Jimmy's voice cracked. "She's not breathing. I cut her down, I'm trying CPR, but nothing's working." The dispatcher remained steady and professional. "Sir, listen carefully. I need you to stay calm. Is she lying flat on the floor? Are you performing chest compressions?" Yes, I'm doing it now," Jimmy replied, his voice rising and falling between panic and determination. The dispatcher counted with him, guiding his compressions over the phone, reminding him not to stop until paramedics arrived. From the recording, his tone seemed filled with urgency, but something about his delivery sounded unusual. It wasn't just raw emotion. There were moments where his words felt almost too carefully chosen, as though he wanted the operator to remember every detail he provided. Meanwhile, across town, a team of paramedics raced through traffic, lights flashing, sirens cutting through the night. The call had come in as a possible suicide attempt, a life-or-death emergency. Every second mattered. When the responders reached the Allen residence, they were met at the door by Jimmy himself. His shirt was damp with sweat, his hands trembling as he urged them to follow him downstairs. "She's down here, please hurry," he shouted. The basement was dimly lit, the single bulb casting long shadows across the room. There, on the floor, lay Amy, motionless. Jimmy was kneeling beside her, his hands still pressing against her chest in the rhythm he had been instructed to keep. To the untrained eye, the scene might have looked straightforward, a husband trying desperately to save his wife. But to seasoned first responders, tiny details immediately stood out. The cord Jimmy said she used was lying off to the side, strangely neat and untangled, not in the chaotic way one might expect after a frantic rescue. The basement ceiling was unusually low, so low that responders quietly wondered how a hanging could have even been possible in that space. The area around Amy was tidy, almost too organized for what was supposed to have been a sudden and violent act. Still, protocol demanded focus. The first responder knelt down, taking over CPR. Another checked Amy's airway and pulse, their movements quick and precise. For a moment, the only sounds in the basement were the steady counts of chest compressions and the faint hum of the light bulb overhead. Jimmy stood back now, pacing in short bursts, wringing his hands. His voice filled the silence as he repeated his account of what happened. "I came downstairs and found her, she was hanging. I cut her down. I tried to save her." He told the story again and again, almost word for word each time, as though he wanted to be absolutely sure that everyone in that basement heard his version. The responders exchanged quick, subtle glances. They were there to save a life, but it was impossible not to notice the unusual atmosphere. A husband who seemed distraught, yes, but whose emotions felt strangely uneven, panicked one moment, curiously composed the next. The basement air was heavy, a mix of tension, confusion, and dread. In that moment, everyone assumed the worst, that Amy was gone and there would be nothing more they could do. But the truth was far more complicated. Because just as the responders prepared themselves for grim confirmation, something unexpected happened, something that would change the entire trajectory of the case. The basement was filled with a tense silence. Paramedics worked quickly, their hands moving with precision, but there was a heaviness in the air. For those first few moments, everyone assumed Amy Allen was gone. Then, something happened that none of them expected. One of the paramedics leaned closer, his hand pressed gently to Amy's neck. His brow furrowed. He checked again, more carefully this time. Suddenly, his voice broke through the quiet. "Wait, hold on. She's breathing." The words seemed to hang in the air, almost unreal. For a split second, the room froze. The other responders turned their heads, their faces shifting from grim certainty to startled disbelief. Jimmy Allen stood nearby, his expression difficult to read. Most people would have collapsed with relief, overjoyed that their loved one was alive. But those who were there later recalled something different. Instead of rushing forward, instead of breaking down in gratitude, Jimmy looked stunned, as if the very news had caught him off guard. The paramedics moved fast now, springing into action with renewed urgency. Oxygen masks were placed, equipment was pulled from bags, vitals were rechecked. Suddenly, what had looked like the aftermath of a tragedy had become a race to save a life. "She's still with us," one responder said firmly, as if reminding the team and the husband alike. The mood shifted instantly. No longer was this just a call to document a death, this was now a fight for survival. Neighbors who had gathered outside the home later told reporters they heard shouting, urgent instructions, and the sound of equipment being rushed inside. To them, it looked like hope had returned. But inside that basement, the shift in atmosphere brought with it an uneasy feeling. If Amy was alive, then Jimmy's story, that she had tried to hang herself and could not be revived, was no longer the whole truth. The discovery changed everything. The responders, focused entirely on stabilizing Amy, had little time to think beyond their immediate mission. But for investigators who would review the reports later, one question would become central. Why did Jimmy Allen look shocked, not relieved, when his wife was found alive? For the moment, Amy was rushed upstairs and prepared for transport to the hospital. Her survival, however fragile, meant the story was far from over. What began as a suspected suicide was now something much more complicated. And for detectives, this moment was the turning point. Amy's faint breath was not only a sign of life, it was the first sign that the truth was far darker than Jimmy wanted anyone to believe. In the hours that followed Amy's transport to the hospital, investigators turned their attention back to the Allen home. The basement, where Jimmy claimed he had found his wife, was now a carefully guarded crime scene. At first glance, Jimmy's story seemed simple. He had walked downstairs, found Amy hanging, cut her down, and tried to save her. But as detectives slowly walked the space, their eyes scanning every corner, doubts began to creep in. The most obvious problem was the ceiling. The basement was low, so low that even standing upright, the detectives could nearly touch the beams above their heads. It was difficult to imagine how anyone could have attempted to hang themselves in such a space. There was simply not enough clearance. Then came the cord. It lay on the floor, loosely coiled, as though it had been gently set down rather than pulled down in a panic. For something that was supposed to have been used in a desperate act, it looked far too neat, far too undisturbed. Detectives studied the beam Jimmy claimed Amy had used. The surface showed no clear signs of strain, no deep marks or grooves where a cord would have borne weight. The knot Jimmy described seemed awkward and clumsy, as if tied quickly to create the appearance of a hanging, but not in the way someone in true distress might have done. The scene felt staged. One investigator quietly remarked to another. "Something isn't right here. This doesn't match the story he's telling us." Photographs were taken of every angle, the cord, the ceiling, the beam, the exact position where Amy's body had supposedly been found. Measurements were made. Notes were written with precision, because already, the officers suspected this was not the scene of a suicide attempt at all. Upstairs, Jimmy repeated his account to detectives, his words mirroring almost exactly what he had told the 911 dispatcher. He insisted he had acted heroically, cutting Amy down, trying to save her life. But the calm repetition, the almost scripted nature of his story, only deepened investigators' unease. Neighbors were questioned as well. None of them had heard any disturbance before the paramedics arrived, no cries for help, no sudden noises from the basement. To detectives, the silence was another red flag. By the end of the night, the basement no longer looked like the setting of a suicide attempt. To those who examined it closely, it looked more like a stage, a place arranged to support a story, not to reveal the truth. What Jimmy Allen had claimed happened and what the physical evidence showed were two very different things. And that gap between story and reality was about to become the focus of the investigation. Because if Amy hadn't truly tried to take her own life, then what exactly had happened in that basement? While detectives combed through the Allen home, Amy was rushed to the hospital, where doctors fought to stabilize her. Her survival was uncertain, but the fact that she was still breathing gave investigators something they rarely had in cases like this, the possibility that the victim herself might eventually tell the truth. In the meantime, the focus shifted to the evidence her body revealed. Doctors began their examinations immediately. What they found raised even more suspicion. At first, Jimmy's story suggested that Amy's injuries should match a hanging. But the marks on her body told a different story. The bruising around her neck didn't resemble the clean, upward pattern usually seen in such cases. Instead, it appeared uneven, suggesting pressure had been applied by force, not by suspension. Specialists examined her airway and throat. They discovered trauma that didn't align with Jimmy's version of events. Some of the injuries were consistent with strangulation, not hanging. And then there were other small details, subtle bruises on her arms and hands, the kind often associated with attempts to fight back. To doctors and forensic experts, these signs painted a clearer picture. Amy's condition wasn't the result of a failed suicide attempt. The injury suggested something far more deliberate, something that pointed to human hands, not a rope. Back at the crime lab, forensic analysts reviewed photographs of the basement scene alongside Amy's medical reports. The contradictions multiplied. The cord Jimmy claimed to have cut down showed no fibers torn by sudden weight. The low basement ceiling made it implausible for hanging to be the cause. And now, the medical evidence confirmed it, her injuries were consistent with an assault. Detectives began to view Jimmy's frantic 911 call in a new light. Had it been a desperate plea for help, or a carefully staged performance designed to cover up what had really happened? The turning point came when a medical examiner reviewed the case. In a written statement, they concluded that Amy's injuries simply could not be explained by hanging alone. Instead, the evidence strongly suggested she had been choked. This revelation was crucial. For investigators, it shifted the entire narrative. What was once described as a tragic suicide attempt was now officially being examined as a possible attempted murder. And with this shift, the case began to focus on motive. If Jimmy's story didn't match the evidence, then the next question was, why would he want to harm his wife? The answers to that would soon come to light, and they would reveal a side of Jimmy Allen that few outside the marriage had ever seen. As investigators pieced together the physical evidence, they knew they needed to go deeper, into the lives of Jimmy and Amy Allen. The basement scene and the medical findings had already raised suspicion, but now the question loomed large, why would a husband harm his wife? The answers began to emerge slowly, through interviews, phone records, and online activity. And what investigators uncovered painted a very different picture of the Allens' marriage than the one Jimmy had presented to the world. On the surface, Jimmy and Amy seemed like an ordinary couple. Friends and neighbors recalled that they kept to themselves, rarely drawing attention. Jimmy came across as controlling but polite in public, while Amy was described as kind, warm, and quietly resilient. But beneath that surface, detectives discovered tensions that had been building for years. Amy, as it turned out, had been leading a private life that Jimmy knew little about, or at least, little he was supposed to know. Investigators traced her phone and computer records, uncovering a secret online relationship she had developed with someone she confided in regularly. Through messages, Amy expressed her struggles, her unhappiness, and even her desire to start fresh away from Jimmy. To those closest to her, these conversations revealed a woman searching for hope. To investigators, they revealed a potential motive. If Jimmy had discovered Amy's secret, it could have sparked anger, jealousy, and fear of losing control. At the same time, friends who were interviewed painted a troubling picture of Jimmy. Behind closed doors, they said, he was not the supportive husband he pretended to be. He was controlling, often keeping track of where Amy went and who she spoke with. Some described him as easily agitated, others as deeply insecure. One friend even recalled Amy hinting that she felt trapped in the marriage, though she had never openly said why. The more detectives learned, the clearer the picture became. Jimmy's image of the devastated husband trying to save his wife clashed with a darker reality, a man whose jealousy and controlling behavior may have boiled over into violence. It wasn't just about Amy's secret relationship, it was about control. Investigators theorized that Jimmy, realizing he was losing the grip he had over his wife, snapped. The supposed suicide scene in the basement wasn't the result of Amy's actions, but of Jimmy's desperation to rewrite what had really happened. This discovery gave prosecutors exactly what they needed, a motive. The forensic evidence showed the act itself. The inconsistencies in the scene exposed the lie. And now, the unraveling of Amy and Jimmy's marriage provided the reason. For detectives, the case was no longer about proving if foul play had happened, it was about proving that Jimmy Allen had intended to silence his wife, and that he nearly succeeded. But as investigators prepared their case, they knew one thing: bringing Jimmy to justice would not be quick, and it would not be easy. What followed was a long legal battle, filled with delays, appeals, and arguments from both sides. And it all led to the moment where justice would finally be decided. After months of investigation, every piece of the puzzle began falling into place. What started as a shocking emergency call had now transformed into a painstakingly built case. Prosecutors had collected the forensic findings, the suspicious circumstances of the so-called suicide attempt, and the troubling details of Jimmy Allen's behavior in the days and weeks leading up to the event. The trial itself became the centerpiece of this pursuit of justice. In the courtroom, jurors listened carefully as experts presented their testimony. Medical professionals explained how Amy's injuries didn't align with Jimmy's version of events, pointing instead to a far more sinister explanation. Detectives took the stand, walking the court step by step through their discovery of inconsistencies in the basement scene. But perhaps most powerful of all were the emotional testimonies from Amy's friends and family. They spoke of a vibrant woman whose life was full of promise, a woman who had dreams, relationships, and a future that should never have been cut short. Their voices brought an unmistakable human element to the cold facts of the investigation, reminding everyone that this was more than evidence, it was about justice for Amy. Jimmy Allen, who had once claimed to be the desperate husband trying to save his wife, now sat in silence as the prosecution dismantled his story. Piece by piece, his narrative collapsed. The defense tried to argue for reasonable doubt, but the weight of the forensic evidence and the implausibility of his explanations left little room to believe his version. Finally, after days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom filled with a tense silence as the judge delivered the sentence, 20 to 45 years in prison. For many, it wasn't just a punishment, it was a declaration that Amy's life mattered, and that her story would not be silenced by lies. For Amy's family, the conviction was bittersweet. They had lost a loved one, but justice had spoken. And for the community, the case served as a reminder that even the most carefully crafted stories can unravel under the weight of truth.